Κύριε Αντιπρόεδρε της Κυβέρνησης, διακεκριμένοι καλεσμένοι και
Mr. Venizelos, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Achilles Tsaltas. I am the Vice President of the International New York Times, and let me welcome you to the second Athens Energy Forum.
Since its rebranding last October, has had a dynamic start accompanied by investments in new writers and editors, online content and video, bringing you a much more robust international sensibility to our print and digital offerings. I start with this rebranding because the Athens Energy Forum is actually the first conference that we co-host here in Greece under the new brand. And I have to say that this is most fitting given that this sector is a sector of the future and in a region that is primed to play an even greater role in the years to come. We are delighted to be convening this conference here in Athens. I would like to extend my sincerest thanks and appreciation to His Excellency, Evangelos Venizelos, and all the distinguished speakers and panelists for accepting our invitation and coming here to discuss a wide range of energy issues and their business and geopolitical implications. I would also like to extend our thanks to our gold, headline and main sponsors, the Public Power Corporation of Greece, the Mytilineos Group, the Consolidated Contractors Company, the Public Gas Corporation, DEPA, and of course TAP, Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, for the generosity in supporting this event to take place. And I cannot not mention the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and especially the International Economic Relations Unit in the help that they've given us. We would also like to thank the Turkish newspaper Dunya and all our media partners, as well as, in alphabetical order, the American, French, German, Italian, and Spanish Chamber of Commerce. This year's event is co-hosted by the International New York Times, our partners in Greece, Kathimerini and Sky Group, and co-organized by Simeon Somoko's company. Thank you, Simeon. For us, Athens is obviously a very special place. We have a great partnership with Kathimerini newspaper that has been printing and distributing us here in Athens for over 15 years with the Kathimerini English edition, making us the first international publication to print in Athens. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here today to review the importance of Greece and the wider region for Europe's energy supply and how countries in the southeastern Europe are organizing, restructuring their energy sector to meet the challenges ahead at a time when the world is still going through intense economic difficulties. Global conversations are still very much dominated by the worries of recession, unemployment, and austerity. And now, on top of that, we have the Ukrainian crisis, the renewed tension with Russia, and the implicit threat to the energy supply and cost for the continent. So, with all this, surely the question is, how can we guarantee a cost-effective and environmentally friendly energy supply? As most of you must be aware, the International New York Times has been convening the oil and gas industry's most significant and must-attend event in London for the last 34 years. So incidentally, this October we will be celebrating our 35 years of the Oil and Money Conference. So we hope to see you in London in October, along with the other 500 or so C-suite executives from the top energy companies in the world. At that conference, at the Oil and Money Conference last year, Christophe de Margerie, the CEO of Total, played on the theme of the conference. The theme was a revolution in progress. So Christophe de Margerie said that the gas and oil industry is not as much in revolution as it is in progress. So, in a way, I think he was lamenting that this industry needs to evolve at a much faster pace, especially given the technological changes and the rise of shale gas. In fact, some of our speakers at that conference last year suggested that perhaps we should rename our conference to Gas and Money, reflecting the growing importance of gas. And I guess this is one reason why gas is having such a focus in this conference today and tomorrow, which is, after all, so crucial in the southeastern Mediterranean region as a new energy map is being created, which is the theme of our conference. Peter Vosser, the CEO of Shell, told us at the same conference that a staggering $30 billion per week, we're talking about $30 billion every week, will be spent on energy projects until 2035 simply to meet demand. Some of this obviously will be spent in this region. So you can imagine the kind of pressure this is putting on the need for technological innovation. But on the other hand, the pressure this is putting on responsible and clean energy. And renewables, ladies and gentlemen, is part of our agenda tomorrow, as there is a need for a real revolution in the renewable energy sector. The recent announcement that gas has surpassed 400 parts, the level of 400 parts per million, is a stark warning that reminds us that the clean energy agenda is not something we can pick up and put down as other world events take focus. If we are to sustain a sustainable future, it falls upon us to ensure political momentum, funding, and technological innovation adequately reflects the urgency of climate challenge. The other challenge that always, but now even more sharply confronts us, is the need to navigate the terrain of geopolitics that this industry is so intertwined with. All we need to do is just listen to what is happening at the Ukraine today. All we need to do is see how the energy war between the West and Russia is evolving, where just 2 days ago the EU Commission announced that it is freezing the development of the South Stream pipelines. And as always, there is surely more like this to come. And I'm sure we will be discussing that over the next 2 days. So we live in transformative times, ladies and gentlemen, and at the New York Times, our mission is to convene conferences just like this one in order to help you, our delegates, debate and navigate the complex terrain of this industry. So we thank you for your attendance, and we thank you in advance for challenging our speakers with your questions. It is important to make this session as interactive as possible, so that way we hope you can leave from this event with some new ideas and actions. Talking about new ideas and actions, we are very privileged to have with us the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Mr. Evangelos Venizelos, especially at this time of the Greek EU presidency. So we would like to hear from you, Mr. Minister, and I call on the floor Athanasios Ellis, Senior Editor of Kathimerini, who will introduce the session with a keynote from Minister Venizelos. Thank you.
Καλησπέρα σας, καλώς ήρθατε.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The first speech for this conference will be delivered by the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Evangelos Venizelos. Of course, we are going to deal first and foremost with developments in the energy sector, since we have had certain developments between Russia and Ukraine. And now, clearly, energy is a top parameter that shapes international developments. And given that, I guess that we could go so far as to say that hopefully energy resources that we expect to find in Greece and those that have already been uncovered in Cyprus and Israel and the respective economic area are important. And so let's lend an ear to what Mr. Venizelos has to say with regard to the EU presidency of the Council and the energy sector. On that note, let me say this. Despite people's doomsday talk, it turns out that the EU presidency is being exercised by Greece in a successful manner, and we also have the upcoming EU elections. One last thing. In the past 4 years, the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Venizelos, has served in 4 very important ministries: the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So that's 3 ministries. All 3 are somehow implicated in the energy sector, and the way in which energy may touch on financial and economic benefits or security and safety issues, or also diplomatic maneuvering that's called for when it comes to capitalizing on energy resources. And given all that, we are looking forward to listening to what Mr. Venizelos has to say. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to warmly thank Mr. Athanasios Ellis for the introductory remarks and for inviting me here. I would also like to warmly thank Mr. Tsaltas for his introductory notes, and in the name of Mr. Tsaltas, I'm actually thanking all the organizers of the Athens Energy Forum. It is a great pleasure for me to be given an opportunity in the name of the Greek government, but also as Greece is exercising the presidency of the Council. I'm pleased to welcome here in Athens all our guests coming from international institutions and organizations, including the European Commission, and welcome guests from other countries and other governments, because we're also joined by government officials from other countries. It is a pleasure to be here because, you see, during these 6 months of the EU presidency, which is exercised by Greece, indeed, we are greatly emphasizing on the energy sector. And the energy sector, indeed, is always very critical, not just for itself or in itself, because it obviously and apparently exercises or rather has an impact on the foreign policy and matters therein that are somehow shaping international relations and developments, and this is part and parcel of EU policies. As Mr. Ellis has just said, the Greek presidency of the EU in this first 6 months is the 5th in the row for Greece. 5th in a row since Greece joined the then European communities in 1981, which means that we have a sort of institutional memory and we have a legacy and a background, given that we've also exercised previously other presidencies. And indeed, in 1994 and in 2003 are the 2 presidencies were closely associated with the recent enlargement of the EU. We kicked off with Europe of the 12 in 1994 in Corfu, in the summit in Corfu. We ended up with Europe of 15, almost 16, had Norway not rejected following a referendum twice its joining the European communities back then. And of course, in 2004, we accepted yet another 10 new member states, and this was the biggest ever such enlargement wave, and this happened in Athens. And among the new members, there was also Cyprus, of course. Our priority, as far as the EU presidency of the Council is concerned, our priorities mostly are determined by what the European societies and people need. We are our presidency is singular. It's shorter than usual, because in a few weeks' time, the mandate of the current European Parliament will be over. But then again, this is also advantageous in the sense that we, during an electoral campaign, in view of an upcoming election for the new European Parliament, we're exercising the presidency, and this is happening. This is so in a critical point in time, because due to the treaty, we're going to have a changes that will lead to a new president for the European Commission, a new president for the European Council, a new High Commissioner for the EU. And mostly this electoral campaign, this pan-European electoral campaign, which coincides with our presidency, makes us face new waves of Euroscepticism. And indeed, there are people who deeply question and profoundly dispute the very ideas and values behind the European integration. We are called upon to present people, the citizens, with a new narrative, a narrative that will be convincing for people, especially the young, that the European Union is does not equal austerity or high unemployment, but rather the European Union equals a new competitiveness model, a new growth and development model, another level of life and living conditions, and a mentality that is enviable by everyone else around the globe. And we also need to talk everyone into really believing that the EU right now preserves the traditional and conventional advantages of the continent, the old continent, and such advantages touch on the field of history, society, finance, economy, politics, and everything. Now, it goes without saying that the top priority is right now, given the presidency, to achieve growth and development. We do need to reinvigorate the true European economy. The European Council, which will be meeting next week under Greece, will mostly discuss the following subject: a new industrial policy. A new industrial policy cannot be there without an energy policy. Any industrial policy whatsoever will depend on two parameters, which we're all well familiar of here in Greece. The first parameter is the cost of money, i.e. interest rates and preconditions and terms for granting loans and credit, having cash flow and liquidity, allowing people access to the banking institutions and non-banking resources. And the second parameter is the cost of energy. Unfortunately, here in Greece, despite the efforts we've exerted, we have been going through and seeing indeed that there are noticeable structural inequalities and inequities. We have a high cost of energy, and of course the cost of money is really high by comparison to our peers elsewhere, especially when it comes to SMEs, including the manufacturing and processing sectors in Greece. So our first priority is growth and development and employment, creating new jobs, that is. We are faced with a very unpleasant theory according to which we can have growth and development, growth without credit and without new jobs or jobs whatsoever. Creditless and jobless growth is a theory we're faced with, and this is causing a sense of disillusionment and disappointment to the business people, but also the citizens overall, because they expect to get a solution to issues of human decency in Europe, especially since mostly the youth are faced with huge unemployment rates throughout Europe. This is our first priority. There's another two, but I'm going to omit them because they are not profoundly associated with the subject matter at hand, but I'm going to tackle the fourth priority of ours, which is the integrated maritime and sea policy, which is a policy that starts with blue growth, touching on renewable energy resources and fisheries, and it also deals with tougher issues, such as, for example, the international legislation, especially when it comes to the Mediterranean and the EU overall. So this is relevant to the International UN Convention on the Right of the Sea, and this also makes reference to exclusive economic zones, especially in the region of the Mediterranean. After all, on that particular subject, we had a recent communiqué by the European Commission, and this is also a priority that is closely associated with research for new resources underwater, and this of course is of interest to us here in Greece, but also every other EU member state that is clearly related to the energy sector. All of our priorities, for that matter, are linked to the energy sector. We are trying to take advantage of our intrinsic resources. We always claim that there is only two intrinsic such resources. There's the land, including the sea, and the people, i.e. the intellect. So there's two types of capital. In our quest for intrinsic resources, this brings us to our mineral resources, be they in in the mainland or in the sea. And as far as that is concerned, important steps have been made in that direction recently, and progress has been made for such matter thanks to the ministry. And on that note, let me acknowledge the presence of Mr. Magnatis, the minister, and his team. They've been instrumental in efforts that have been made and progress achieved. Oh, this is a critical issue, but then again, this issue is also closely associated to the so-called and rather famous energy diplomacy. This is also linked to the different resources, and of course, we have to make relevant steps to make sure that such resources will be taken advantage of for the sake of the Greek and the European economy as a whole. As you can probably understand, for Greece, our fleet, our merchant marine, always offers and has been always offering a competitive advantage. This is, after all, a country that has a cosmopolitan character in the sense that its fleet is the biggest in Europe. And when it comes to our energy policy, I guess, needless for me to explain to you how closely associated energy policy overall is linked to maritime policy, not just because there's liquefied natural gas and the fact that LNG is also, and the condensed form thereof is playing a critical role in our shipping industry. But you see, the GDP generated by the Greek fleet and the Greek merchant marine is quite impressive. It's almost as much as the tourist industry is bringing in. So given all that, we are very pleased to have this Energy Forum meet. The Athens Energy Forum for 2014 indeed coincides with a point in time when we are about to present very specific results and concrete outcomes when it comes to the Greek resources, especially mineral resources in Greece. But Mr. Magnatis, I'm aware, he is going to discuss this. So in the land, but also in the sea, mostly in the Ionian Sea and in the seas which lie southern of Crete, we do have such resources, but we haven't forgotten about lignite, because this is yet another resource that we have. And lignite right now is subject to very strict limitations and due to EU regulations. So we have to look into scope there is for such resources and who is going to pay the cost for any restrictions. And we also have to look into the alternatives we have and what we can do for the sake of the EU, where we shouldn't have inequalities and we should have no energy dumping happen in this field either. Now, given that, or rather all of that, directly impacts on our diplomatic presence, our external foreign policies, our regional policies, especially in southeastern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean region. You're all aware of the fact that there is a new momentum there, a new momentum as concerns the solution to the Cypriot issue right now after the common communique that was issued by the leaders of the two communities. There is a debate in progress. Mr. Anastasiadis and Mr. Eroglu are taking part in such talks, and this makes us face or brings us face to face with an open and pending international issue that concerns the invasion and occupation of a big part of the Cypriot territory. And this is an international issue, but it's also obvious that the political issue Cyprus is faced with is closely and directly associated with the capitalization on the, or rather the utilization of the resources that the Cypriot Republic has, i.e., this concerns a united Cyprus, as we would all like to see happen. It is important for this issue to be settled eventually. It is very important to remember that the Cypriot Republic is a member of the EU. It's a European state. It is a Mediterranean country, and it's exercised all of its rights the way they were stipulated in and provided by international legislation. Moreover, this is a member state which has successfully made respective agreements and pacts with its adjacent and neighboring countries to protect its continental shelf and its resources. And so Greece, among other countries, including the US, according to a recent statement by President Obama, is in favor of the legal exercise of the sovereign and territorial rights of the Cypriot Republic in order to preserve such resources and foster cooperation schemes with other countries, including, among others, naturally, Israel and Egypt. And such partnerships will never turn against any other country, of course. And this is not a contradiction, nor is this a hostile activity. There's, after all, no exclusion of any country from such partnership schemes, which are always counting on respect for international legislation, acceptance of rules which emanates from the conventional treaties and the law of the sea, which makes us also quite happy, because given that we already have a very important Achilles, for we have the 1977 Greek-Italian Convention for the delineation of the continental shelf. This is an agreement we had back in 1977 with Italy, and we're trying to turn it into a multilateral convention that will include the exclusive zones as well. Now, hopefully, after the discussions we had with the Albanian government, always in a framework of good neighborly relations and friendly ties for that matter, the convention that was signed back in 2009 on the territorial self, the exclusive economic areas, among others, this bilateral agreement, hopefully, will be ratified and adopted, and so it will come into force. And this is the wish and desire of both parties. Hopefully this will be enforced within the wider context of international legislation. After all, we have excellent relations, and this means that Albania is on its way to the European Union after it actually joined NATO. We are hopeful that by June, and always given the deadlines and timeline of the current EU presidency of the Council by Greece, we will be given yet another opportunity to touch on this issue when the General Affairs Council will meet, and so hopefully we will be able to grant Albania candidate status. Greece has stated loud and clear on every possible occasion the ways in which it perceives itself. We are a hub for natural gas and also oil, to a smaller extent maybe, and so we are very happy and pleased because a decision was made by the Athanasios consortium so that TAP was eventually opted for. And so this decision allows us scope to have closer ties and cooperation with Albania and Italy, whom we are partners with. And this has been clear all along. We are also happy because this also brings us closer together with Azerbaijan. After all, Azerbaijan has a nodal position. It's a hub when it comes to the Eastern Partnership, and this is a partnership that has been fostered by the European Union. Now, maybe we are focusing on Ukraine and maybe Moldova and then Georgia, but let us not forget other countries within the Eastern Partnership, and such countries include Azerbaijan, since it's institutionally lagging behind right now as regards the EU, but this does not signify that it's less important for energy development issues in the EU, especially when it comes to issues that are pertinent to the neighborhood or Eastern Partnership relations of the EU. We're also happy to notice that TAP is picking up speed. It's taking advantage of its scope. We're also pleased with everything that's happening as concerns the Ionian Adriatic pipeline. We are steadily and steadfastly promoting our policies with regard to TAP and FIROM, Bulgaria. A choice that was not made when TAP was eventually opted for can be somehow replaced, or now at the table we have various ideas and plans on projects that are low cost and pretty feasible. So they're there to fill in any gap or vacuum that people originally thought they would be there because the first choice for TAP or the first option did not materialize. So as a result thereof, I believe that there was always a latent dynamics for TAP, and now the fact that the definite option was selected offers new prospects for employment during the operation, but also the construction stage as well. Now, we can't help but notice that TAP also offers great scope for energy and diplomacy, and much so, even more than what we expected. In the first place, a few days ago, i.e. on the 24th of February in Budapest, I had the chance to partake in a conversation between me and the peers of the 4 countries of the Visegrad and the 3 Balkan countries that are members of the EU. So, the ministers of Hungary, of Poland, of the Czech Republic, of Bulgaria, Romania and Greece were there. And we touched on the Central Corridor. During that discussion of ours back in February, we first highlighted the relative simplicity of this plan, and we also secondly highlighted the great edge, strategic edge that this solution provides, because the terminal for LNG in Revithoussa is important, and thus Greece is on the map of the energy map of Southeastern Europe and Central Europe for that matter, because this is an advantage we have and other countries in the area do not have such an advantage, at least not to that extent. Let us take into account scope there is for Greece in order for it to generally develop such terminals for LNG or condensated LNG. So given that, it is important for us to look into great prospects, because there are such prospects and we have to examine them. Let me not omit to make a reference to the fact that the Burgas-Alexandroupolis pipeline, the oil pipeline for that matter, is a political and business project which we unfailingly believe is feasible. We never gave up on the idea of having this pipeline materialize, and it's important for us to stress this, and we always stress the fact that we believe this is still feasible, and we always stress that in the face of our interlocutors who've been involved in such planning. Historically speaking, when the idea of putting together this forum, this energy forum, was announced or publicized, obviously we had no idea that this forum would happen at a time when we would be faced with a global crisis that is somehow turning or could possibly turn Europe into a continent faced with Cold War circumstances or quasi-Cold War. All of a sudden, the crisis in Ukraine is bringing us face to face with a reality that we've forgotten about. Nothing is linear, nothing is treated as an acquis, nothing can be ruled out or excluded. That is why we always have to follow a principles policy. This is what we do as Greece, this is what we do as the EU. We count on international legality and legitimacy. We always abide by international legislation. We are fully observant and respectful of resolutions and decisions by the UN, and especially the UN Security Council, which is the guardian of international legitimacy and international stability and peace. It is very important for us to deal with situations in a calm manner, in a cool-headed manner, without actually having reactions that will be determined by specificities. We have to have an overall frame of mind which we'll stick to. It's also important for the EU to abide by its own, or rather abide to its own principles. Throughout history it's done so, and if we want to ensure a so-called political culture and civilization, then we have to ensure the energy sufficiency for the EU. We have to have energy safety and security in place, and we're there to do so. It is also critically important for the EU to make choices that will not be dictated, nor should they be shaped by conspiracy theories or junctions. I mean, there have been theories in the past according to which all previous wars can be explained under different terms. But then again, we have to subscribe to an overall framework that will not be shaped just by interests, political, economic, or energy interests for that matter. In that sense, we deeply care and concern ourselves with developments. We are not exercising the EU presidency of the Council in the field of external affairs. As you know, the External Affairs Council is presided by the permanent presidency of Mrs. Ashton, who is the High Commissioner at this point in time. But to the extent that the Ukrainian crisis is linked to the enlargement policies and neighborhood policies that we enforce, then the General Affairs Councils, which is presided by the Greek presidency, the Hellenic presidency, is dealing with such matters. We do realize that it's important to highlight the Memorandum of Budapest and the guaranteeing powers. When the memorandum was signed, Ukraine became a signatory party to the Convention for the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Arms. So we are following on developments. We are following up on developments that relate to Ukraine and the overall crisis. We're also closely monitoring the situation as concerns nuclear fuel and its needs. Ukraine's needs, that is. And we're also following up on developments touching on its monetary issues. So we are in touch with the IMF, but also the international community, because the price of natural gas in Ukraine matters to us all. A few days ago, I paid a visit to Mariupol. I went there in order for me to express the sympathy of the Greek government to the many Greeks who live in eastern Ukraine. 150 Ukrainian citizens of Greek origin are indeed very active within the context of local communities there. This is a true civil society in that area. So I had a chance to have a conversation with the transitional authorities of Ukraine. The highest level such senior officials were the ones I talked to. I am aware of how critical the situation is, and I'm hopeful that maybe by Monday or on Monday we will have a chance to make an assessment on current developments so as for us to provide prospects for political solution and diplomatic solutions to such an issue without at the same time leading to yet another crisis in the energy market of Europe. I will moreover have a chance to follow in on the steps of Mrs. Ashton, so I'm going to Tehran tomorrow. And I'm going there to have a political discussion with the new Iranian government. And we're going to talk about the new framework that is in place, the new framework that was determined by the interim agreement. We are going to assess what we can do and what prospects are now being opened, given that there is this new interim agreement. Hopefully this will turn into a final agreement that will lead to the lifting of sanctions, and so eventually we will have a new landscape in the global energy market, and this is very interesting to us, of course, amongst others, especially as concerns oil, but not just oil. And this meeting of yours, on that note too, I'm sure is going to provide us with ideas, data and information that we're going to capitalize on as much as we can. All of this neighborhood, the southern European neighborhood, this part of the Mediterranean is in constant upheaval. Unfortunately, this is a constant problem that is impacting on our European regional policies. But we're also happy due to the fact that in the forthcoming weeks we're going to host a ministerial meeting of the EU member states in Thessaloniki. And we will also have the representatives and delegates from the 6 Western Balkan countries that are candidates to the EU, and then we are going to have a ministerial summit of the 28 EU member states. They will meet here in Athens, and they will be also meeting with the Arab League ministers, and so we will thus have an opportunity to touch on issues that are impacting on the energy market and issues that are also touching on the LNG market, the pipeline diplomacy. So we will be elaborating on a number of issues that I've already made reference to so far. After all, Cyprus is also something that I've referred to, and we will also be touching on that as well. As I am about to conclude, let me just say this. Since the EU energy policies are always focused around two main issues. First, the need to have diversification of resources for oil and gas, and also diversification in terms of channels and pathways and networks for providing CLNG and LNG, bearing in mind developments in the American market, where we have shale gas and relevant new technologies in that field. So bearing in mind this, and also bearing in mind the need there is in order for us to make sure that we respect the rules of competition, rest assured that, as far as we are concerned, on the level of the ministers of foreign affairs, we're always careful, or always take into account the foreign affairs parameters, and that is why we have invited next Monday the relevant commissioner to attend the Ministers of Foreign Affairs meeting and talk, so as for him to make a presentation and elaborate on his point of view, bearing in mind what's happening in Ukraine, and not just in Ukraine, because we will subsequently be issuing a common communique as a whole, and we will thus be elaborating on what we need to do as concerns the South Stream, the Nord Stream, Ukraine. We also have to and bear into account the major players in the energy market, including Gazprom, because the relations with Russia are under tension, and everything will be translated into policies and politics. I'm also going to tell Mr. Oettinger, the Commissioner, during that meeting, that the first thing one would expect the European Commission, since we're talking about a single energy market, and since we're talking about the need to do away with the structural inequalities amongst the member states, the first thing we have to do is to have one single and common negotiation as concerns the price of natural gas, so as for us to make sure that there will be no dramatic or huge discrepancies in the prices, that since they also lead to competitiveness issues and pricing issues and inequalities that are to the detriment of the small countries, including Greece, and first and foremost Greece, I'd say, because it's one thing to have a negotiation in your own name, on your own, and it's another thing to have such a negotiation with or rather in the context of the EU. Because we're always taking into account healthy competition, and we are always interested in the relevant channels and networks and diversification, just like I said before. But the simplest thing, the most important thing, is to have one single negotiation for one single pricing, common pricing, and this has not happened, and it's not been clear. You do realize that if you take into account the fact that there are countries that produce nuclear energy, and there are other countries who, because they are more sensitive and sensible to the environment, or maybe they have tradition in not using the nuclear energy, well, you do realize that there is a gap between the two, and this greatly affects the correlation of powers within the EU. Now, honestly, this is my last remark. This is the epilogue, and I will let you be. But as you realize, the connection or the relations between the private and the public field is a subject which is always popular whenever whatever a discussion might involve. But when it comes to energy plans and diplomacy and energy projects, the relations between the public and the private sector is more than obvious, because it involves geopolitics, national sovereignty issues, sovereign rights, external affairs, foreign affairs, safety, security affairs. And then we're also taking into account issues that there are problems like technology problems, investment project problems, risk entrepreneurship projects, know-how problems. And you see, this is a sort of entrepreneurship that is really classical, and then again it's post-industrial, post-modern as well, because everything that's happening and which involves mineral resources is in the essence of the capitalist model. Now, take into account, for example, shale gas. Shale gas is actually a new development that makes us realize that leaps and bounds are happening in the field of resourcefulness and innovation. And such leaps and bounds are changing the landscape. They are changing the whole situation, even geopolitics. So this is a very appealing and interesting field, energies. So you have the public sector in absolute terms, or public involvement. And this is part and parcel of the fundamental prerequisites and standards for having a national strategy or supranational strategies, including the EU. So you have to plan ahead in view of new developments in safety, security and defense. And then you have a field, i.e. the private sector mostly, where you have growth, development, competitiveness and research. And this is the market at its best, or at its fullest. So you do realize that we have to somehow resynthesize all this. We have to bring them all together in one equation so as to have the best possible results, the optimal results for the sake sake of our economy, for the sake of our peoples, for the sake of welfare and security for the people. Given that all discussions touching on energy are at the core of debates that will shape the future of EU economy and the world. And that's why I'm pleased you decided to put together this event here in Athens, an event which coincides with the Greek presidency. Let me welcome you yet again and wish you every success.
Να εκμεταλλευτούμε την παρουσία του.
Let us take advantage of the Deputy Prime Minister's present. Maybe some would like to take the floor and ask questions. I myself have a very brief question. Maybe Mr. Maniatis will be elaborating on what I'm asking, but maybe you can give us the general framework for or rather make a general reference to resources that are in Greece, because there's been research conducted in that field. Do we have any sense or idea of what there is in Greece? Well, listen, Mr. Maniatis is going to give you the details. Allow me to respond by making a comment on the way in which we've been handling this issue. We have been handling such issues with an unusually high degree of self-restraint by Greek and international standards. We have been following and are following the most safe international methods. We have excellent cooperation schemes worldwide, so we have very safe data we can count on, and on the basis of such scientific data we are opening up to the market, and we are accepting and agreeing with the cooperation proposal so as for us to subsequently take advantage of scope there is for new projects and capitalizing on such resources. Of course, as you know, in the energy field there are lots of ideas and news and proposals. We keep hearing about new reserves and resources. We keep hearing about scope there is for those to be somehow securitized, so as for securitization of such resources to provide solutions to big fiscal problems. It's very difficult for anyone to move along those lines and make macroeconomic calculations and estimates and decide what this will mean in the next 40 years or in 40 years' time, and in net values and prices, and find out numbers, figures, and indeed corroborate the presence of resources here or elsewhere. But then again, it's true, there are proposals, there are ideas, there's a lot that's been said about diversification, diversifying resources through other modes and means, and having LNG or CLNG. If you take a look at the number of ideas from a communications point of view, and then you assess such ideas and proposals from a fiscal point of view, an economic point of view, you will find there's a great distance between the two. We want to take steps, concrete steps, and be sure about them. We want to exercise fully our sovereign rights, and we are also preparing within the confines of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, always in close cooperation with the Ministry of the Environment, Energy and Climate Change. So expect to have the outcome of such efforts become obvious pretty soon. We are always emphasizing on international legality and excellent neighborly relations. We want to make sure there will be no conflict, no tension, always being fully respectful of international legitimacy. And we follow international practices that are there to provide solutions. In that sense, Greece has indeed great scope in that field. I don't want to use any other adjective. Great scope there is. And we are pretty anchored as concerns our position within the energy map. We never forget about the size of Greece. We are a middle size, or an average, if you will, country. We do not downplay on our capacities, especially when such capacities and resources are closely associated with issues of great importance, such as the Cypriot issue. Let us have the first question, since it's topical. We have an upcoming European election, so Ms. Tzavela, a Euro MP, will take the floor. Minister, My question is about South Stream. Mr. Oettinger made an announcement according to which, given the crisis in Ukraine, all talks and negotiations with Gazprom as regards South Stream will be put on hold. Bulgaria said they're going to bilaterally continue, but as of yesterday, Gazprom has said that the eventual agreement will have been made on the South Stream by the end of this month. Do you have any news on that? This is not the most propitious time for us to talk about this issue in view of developments that we expect to see happen in the next few days. But I know, Ms. Tzavela, that you are you have profound knowledge on such issues, and you've made respective reports before the EU, and quite successful have done so. Let's not forget that there's more than just South Stream. There are more pipeline projects and plans that are associated with Gazprom and Russia. And so Europe has to have a unified stance in the management of issues that involve Russia, because quite often people have the impression that there is increased sensibility or sensitivity vis-à-vis the South Stream, and
άλλες ανισότητες στο
εσωτερικό
της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, δεν θα θέλαμε να πληρώσουμε μία ακόμη ανισότητα. Πρώτον αυτό. Δεύτερον, ο κύριος Έτιγκερ, όπως θα έχω την ευκαιρία να του πω και τη Δευτέρα, σε ένα πολιτικό επίπεδο, αλλά όπως του έχουν πει ήδη οι Υπουργοί Ενέργειας,
on a political level. But then again, Mr. Maniatis has told me that his peers have already said so much to him. All countries that are involved in the South Stream have told Mr. Oettinger that he has to always consult with the member states involved. And this is what we will adhere to, or else we would be faced with another inequality.
θερμοί υποστηρικτές του ρόλου της Ευρωπαϊκής Επιτροπής. Προσωπικά είμαι Ευρωπαϊστής, πιστεύω στο ρόλο της Ευρωπαϊκής Επιτροπής ως βασικού μοχλού για την ευρωπαϊκή ολοκλήρωση. Είμαι οπαδός της κοινοτικής μεθόδου και όχι της διακυβερνητικής μεθόδου. Αλλά δεν μπορεί να είμαστε ιστορικά και πολιτικά αφελείς ή αδικούμενοι. Ως εκ τούτου, λοιπόν, πρώτον τον προτρέπουμε να αναλάβει την ενιαία διαπραγμάτευση για την τιμή, όπως είπα προηγουμένως, και δεύτερον, τον παρακαλούμε να είναι στη διαβούλευση με τα εμπλεκόμενα κράτη και τρίτον, να υπάρχει ενιαία αντιμετώπιση όλων των αγωγών και όλων των σχέσεων μεταξύ Ευρώπης και Ρωσίας στα θέματα αυτά.
Επειδή βγαίνουμε εκτός προγράμματος με
We're running late, as I'm told, so I guess this is the end of the Q&A. We're going to have a first panel discussion right away. Thank you very much.